Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Staten Island Young Republicans Live here on our Facebook page. Skyler can't make it with us tonight. He has a final to take care of, so it's just going to be me and Peter tonight coming at you with it's really going to be a great show tonight. We got some really nice, interesting topics. We're going to follow up on part 2 of the red versus blue skate issue that we were discussing about 2 episodes ago. We're also going to get into the Space Force, which is the new branch of the military, and then we are going to speak about the potential candidates for VP for Joe Biden. But before we get into that, I want to make a reference to our honorable mentions that did not make it onto our lineup for tonight. So for me, I have the honorable mention of stating that the hospitals here on Staten Island have gone about 48 hours without any new case of coronavirus. So that's very good. So it's been 48 hours of no new case, no new admissions for the coronavirus. So that's very positive. It's a very good thing. It's things like this that we need in order to hit those checklists that we discussed last week for us to go into phase 1. And again, once all these things are happening, even though the governor has extended New York City to June 6th, if we meet the required criteria for phase 1 before then, we will immediately go into phase 1. So things like this are very good. It's great to hear that. It's a step in the right direction to hopefully opening the city back up and having this lockdown stop. But on that note, Peter, what's your honorable mention for tonight?
So my honorable mention actually has something to do with what you just said. This is actually for our friends in upstate New York who are already getting on the way to reopening. I know our friends Bobby and Eliza from the College Republicans, they're actually excited. Some of the retail stores in their area up in Schenectady are finally reopening. So it's, I think, a little bit of good news there. It looks like things are moving somewhat back to normal, a little slow, but we'll get there.
But some normalcy. I just as an ancillary comment here, it's so funny. I really find it so interesting because there was what state was it that I think it was Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. I was watching the news today, and it was Michigan where the hairdressers and hair salons were not considered essential employees to be considered in the opening phase of reopening the state. And there was a massive protest where people were actually on the steps of the Capitol cutting people's hairs. And I just find it so funny how of all the jobs and everything else, the hair salons are the forefront of the non-essential people that are really sticking it to everybody with the protests here. I just find it astronomical. I mean, maybe I don't see the real reason for it. I mean, as you can tell, I do not have the same hair issues as some people do. But
I need a haircut so bad.
Yeah, luckily I'm my own barber, so I haven't had to worry about that since the start of this whole thing. But anyways, getting into our topics for tonight. So we're going to discuss again part 2 of the red versus blue state. So basically what we're looking at here is a continuation of what we were talking about 2 weeks ago, when we were discussing the economic balance between red and blue states. So interestingly enough, we are going to look at California first, realistically, obviously California being as the blue state. Interesting enough, California, Governor Newsom has just put out that he is going to be shutting down government-funded prisons in the state of California. Not all of them, but some of them, in order to revitalize the budget and try and help combat the $53 billion budget deficit that they have, and help move things along from what has gone on with the deficit of coronavirus. Now, the funny thing here with this is this kind of ties into what we were talking about last time with social reforms and social services that deplete blue state budgets. And in this particular situation, the reason why I bring this up that way is because of the budget deficit, now prisons are being shut down, and prison reform is being done in California, where Governor Newsom is going to have it that a max sentence would be 2 years as opposed to 5 years on probation, and virtually people, even with hard felonies, can get out with in a year's time for good behavior, 18 months if you're a sex offender. So these things are happening basically because they fell into a deficit and they couldn't manage their budget. However, something that's interesting, just recently, Governor Newsom has passed a bill, has passed an executive order that he is doing $125 million relief fund for those who were affected by the coronavirus that are illegally staying in the state of California. So these were the things that we were talking about last time, where these social reforms that they have really cut into the budget and really do harmful things that deficit a state. And California is a perfect example here. So full disclosure here, let's go into what we're talking about here. So the $125 million relief that they're putting in for the illegal immigrants, it's $75 million is taxpayer money, and then the other $50 million is being raised by charitable organizations, okay? But now just think about it. $75 million is taxpayers, where the latter is from charity, and the charitable organizations have the lower end that they promised to raise $50 million. Here's a situation where the taxpayers are still paying the big buyout, and not only that, but these are illegal immigrants, okay? These are illegal people that are not supposed to be in this country by state and federal law, okay? And they're getting benefits that American citizens are barely getting the benefit of. Now, Governor Newsom is begging, basically, the federal government to bail them out. They're looking for the HEROES Act to be passed. For those of you who don't know, the HEROES Act is a $3 trillion bill that has been introduced to Congress. It is for a bailout reform, basically to help the states that have these deficits and have these problems that's been going on with coronavirus. So Governor Newsom is begging the federal government to pass that, so that way they can get and helping get their funding. Meanwhile, he's crying, woe is me.
A lot of other Dem governors are begging for the money as well. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of blue states separate from California. New York is one of them, where the governor is literally begging for this money. De Blasio is begging for money. And there's an interesting article that we'll talk more about later, but it's criticizing Bill de Blasio for regularly begging for money, but also being able to pay out for certain projects that the city is still running, in a lot of the social services programs. So it's exposing a lot of the people that usually that usually cry, oh, I need money, and now you're actually hearing about where they're spending some of the money they already got. So it's a good point you brought up.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, well, it's really funny, just to stick to California really quickly, and then we'll expand out. But the funny thing with California is, Peter, are you there? Screen froze a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you cut out for a sec, but you're good. Yep, I hear you.
Okay. Okay, great. So going back to California really quickly. So what's really interesting with this whole thing is that it is actually against federal and state law to give out any type of funding or monetary distribution to those who are here illegally. Now, there is actually a lawsuit that is pending right now against California that is basically saying, as such as what I said, that they should not be getting distributions like this because it is illegal. Now, funny thing is, and this is not also just Governor Newsom, this is other governors throughout the country who have requested that the Department of Education funnel out money to students who are in need of some sort of bailout or financial assistance because of what's going on with the coronavirus. Now, of the amounts of students in California, it's 70,000 are undocumented illegal citizens who were originally under the DACA Act. And obviously the DACA Act has been repealed, so it doesn't exist. But the Department of Education was basically like, we're not doing that because it's against federal law to distribute these funds to these students because they're not here legally. And so, of course, a lawsuit has been enacted on this, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this is going to come out, because it's just, and this is not just Governor Newsom. This is about many other states, like here in New York City with our sanctuary cities, we are doing things that are against federal law. And it's very interesting because there is something called the Supremacy Clause. Now, the way it works, just to give you guys a background, legally speaking, the way it works here is that the federal government is a government of very limited powers. And basically what that means is they can only act upon what is divvied out to them through the federal Constitution. Now, the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights states that any powers not designated to the federal government is automatically given and left to the states to decide. However, anything that the federal government has the ability to act on and has already acted on, what's called the Supremacy Clause takes over. And therefore, the states cannot enact any legislation against federal mandate because then it's unconstitutional. It's against the federal rule. And that's basically what they're doing here. And not only are they doing that, but there's also state enacted laws that coincide with these federal regulations and federal laws. And they're going against both of them. They're going against their own state laws, their own state constitutions. And it's very interesting how, when it comes to this topic, it's almost as if there's no such thing as law. And there's no such thing as following the rule of law to what the standard is. And it's very interesting. But yeah, it's not just California. It's many other states, just like here in New York as well. You know, Peter, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm glad you tackled the legal end of it, especially in the beginning when you were talking about the California prison scene over there. Truthfully, I think that it's like I said, this whole thing is exposing a lot of the governors that are crying foul about needing money, yet they're continuing to spend on programs. And I look at New York City, for example, and I know we're talking about California, but I like to pick New York City because it is a large city, and de Blasio has been complaining about wanting federal money for weeks now. The latest thing is they're using, and this is a typical tactic that Democrats will use when trying to negotiate budgets, is they'll use public education, social services programs that actually impact senior citizens, things that aren't exactly controversial, to turn around and say, well, we're going to have to cut this program if we don't get all this money. And truthfully, that's just a load of BS, because at the end of the day, they can easily find the money if they cut costs. And I mentioned the DOE specifically when I first opened this, because the New York City schools chancellor, and I'm sure other left-wing education officials in the country have used a similar tactic of, oh, well, there's no additional cutting we can do. And when I read the headline about the DOE being afraid that they're going to have to reduce their budget, I think the quote was, we've already reduced it as much as we can. We can't find any more money to cut, which is crazy. Chancellor Carranza had spent however many hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate his office at Tweed Courthouse, which is where the Department of Education for New York City is located. I mean, it just kind of shows the hypocrisy that a lot of people on the left will often be caught in. California, for example, you said earlier, it's something like 53 or 54 billion dollar deficit that they're facing. Bear in mind, New York is also facing a $6 billion deficit that was mostly due to Medicaid costs originally, and has now morphed into about 10 billion is what they're talking about, being the projected budget deficit, with some of the affected spending revenue loss. But California, 53 or 54 billion dollars is their deficit, and they have a population that's only slightly larger than New York's. Yeah, 53.4 billion, and their population is not much bigger than New York's, and they're in a similar boat where California is notorious for being one of the most high tax states in the country, notorious for being one of the having one of the highest costs of living in the country. And the comparison we make here, red state, blue state, you look at red states like Texas and Florida, where they effectively have a zero income tax. They have a load of other other measures that really save taxpayers money, and they go about planning their budget a little smarter. And the populations are on par with California and Florida, respectively.
Yeah.
The usual comparison is Florida and New York. Florida,
Well,
New York's population is about 19 and change million.
mhm,
Florida's is about 22, 24 million. And they have an older senior population. They have more costs. They should have more costs, as you expect, but because it's done to some degree smartly, money is allocated smartly. Um, they don't have a budget deficit. They actually have a
they-
surplus, I think, going back a while. Um, and they don't charge income tax. I mean, there's a number of things, but back to California for a second specifically, I found it to be extremely ironic that they are literally within the same 24-hour period, they went from, hey, we're gonna do. I think that that 125 what was $125 million aid package.
yeah.
It'll amount to about a $500 payment for each undocumented immigrant, and I would imagine others, but $500
It's
to
five
each
hundred. It's
undocumented
$500
immigrant.
a person or 1,000 a household. It's made to divvy out between 150,000 immigrants.
Yeah. So I mean, that alone, I would say the ironic part of this was that the same day, it might have even been the same day. It might not even have been a 24-hour period. The same day, there was also a report that the governor was talking about closing jails and releasing
Yeah.
some prisoners. And we actually have that same situation here in New York, where
Yeah.
part of Mayor De Blasio's agenda was to reduce the New York City jail population. And I would say for their agenda, coronavirus was in some ways a blessing in disguise, because there was a lot of critics on the jail population reduction commission, whatever it was called. This is going back a few years. I believe the former Chief Justice of New York State, Chief Justice Lippman, I believe his name was. He was the chair of the commission. So it was supposed to be bipartisan, had Democrats, Republicans, and the end result was that they were going to drastically reduce the number of inmates in the city jail at Rikers Island. The number that they said was actually ridiculous, because it would have been, I think the goal date they set was like they were going to reduce it by like 75%. Don't quote me on this, but it was like 75% by 2021, which is totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
You're basically saying, yeah, you're basically waiving people's whatchamacallit. Look, granted, I guess some people are in there, they're awaiting trial. There's no reason for them to wait a year, 2 years for a trial. Like, it's supposed to be short term, but don't rush certain people out that don't necessarily need to be pushed out. The commission had went through, made a whole bunch of recommendations. One of them was this drastic reduction of the prison population, and it's almost as if coronavirus really helped push them further to aggressively reducing the jail population, because now they're talking about. I remember when the mayor first posed this a month ago, I think it was. He said, "Yeah, we're talking about releasing 100 inmates." Then it was 200. Then it was 300. Then it was 400. And eventually it grew. I think they're over 1,000 now. And the sad part is that because this was part of their agenda, under the cover of we're doing this because of coronavirus, they were able to they're out there saying, hey, we're reducing our prison population as if it's business as usual, but it's really tied into we're reducing it because we want to protect them from coronavirus, rightfully so. But then I think the entirely separate issue of this, and California may have the same problem, being that a lot of the people that were released for coronavirus related fears, they were back in within 24, 48,
Yeah.
72 hours. And I think that's something that should really stand out here about just how jank their entire operation is. I mean, it's trying to fulfill an agenda even in crisis. The
Yeah.
usual saying is Democrats never let a good crisis go to waste, and we're seeing that in so many ways. This is one of them.
No, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I do appreciate the fact that you actually brought up Florida, which I think is a perfect example here. So I just want to really quickly swing back to what Peter was saying here about Florida, and Florida in comparison to New York specifically. Okay, so Florida is not in a deficit. Florida is in a surplus. New York is in a deficit. Okay, so just a few points of reference here for Florida, right? So Florida originally in 2014 had a population of 18 million and change, while New York had a population of 19 million and change, okay? Fast forward to 2020, New York's population has not budged that much. It maybe have went from 19.1 million, 1 million to 19.8
down,
million.
if anything, I think.
Florida, on the other hand, right, it went down because I was going to get to that point, but it did go down. It went high. In other words, it went high and then it went down because what's basically happened, just to jump ahead really quick to touch on Peter's point here, what happens is people are leaving New York because of the taxes here. That's basically what it is. No, it's totally fine. It doesn't matter. But it's basically the same thing as what we were discussing last week about Tesla leaving California to go to Texas because of the taxes. So it's kind of the same thing that's happening here in New York. So now in 2020, like I said, New York's population is roughly 19.8 million, around there, and Florida's is 21.6 million, around that number. Okay, so Florida has a higher population than New York. Okay. New York has, Florida has a higher population in senior citizens than New York, and yet we are spending more money on Medicaid a year than Florida is. It's very interesting. Again, Florida is a red state for all intents and purposes. It's a red state. New York's a blue state. Okay. We have a lesser elder population than Florida does, yet we spend more in social funding for the elder than Florida does. And Florida's healthcare system towards the elder is in a much better shape than New York's is. Okay. We also don't see going on in Florida what happened here with the nursing homes in New York with the massive deaths that were going on. We don't see that in Florida. Okay, which is another big thing. Another thing that we don't see in Florida that we see here in New York is the income taxes. Florida doesn't have income taxes. New York has income taxes. New York has one of the highest income tax rates in the states. These are all the things that are building up on top and top and top of blue states that create the problem. And you don't see these things in the red states. And the red states are doing fine. And it's very interesting if you think about it mathematically. So New York has an income tax that Florida doesn't. So that is an extra avenue of revenue that New York has that Florida doesn't. Meanwhile, they maintain a surplus while New York doesn't. Mathematically alone, that should be very telling to you. Now, of course, someone like Governor Cuomo, we've discussed this, he would say that he gives more back to the federal government. But here's the interesting thing when you compare Florida and New York to each other. New York gives about 35.9% back a year to the federal government. Florida, in comparison, gives about 32.7 a year. It's not that big of a difference. Florida is right behind New York in how much they give back to the federal government. Meanwhile, they're still doing better, economically speaking. So it's very interesting that it's almost as if every single one of Cuomo's arguments that he could possibly make, a state like Florida, just absolutely crumbles them. And it's really astonishing. There is just, and another thing too that is very astonishing. Let's talk about any type of extra funding or extra deficit that's come here from the coronavirus. Florida was looked at to be worse, if not just as bad as New York, because you have Miami, you have places like Disney World, you have a lot of areas in Florida that generate a high, I don't want to say immigration, but a migration, if you will, of either people from overseas visiting or just people from the rest of the country visiting. Just kind of like similar to Manhattan. Florida is in the corona field doing 10 times better than New York. Absolutely better than New York. So not only are they handling things better that way through red leadership, through red policies, economically speaking, it's a no-brainer. Florida
it's funny with how much crap Governor DeSantis got from people, even in his own party in some places. He got a lot of crap for defying the federal government in the first place. I think we're trying to stay open, and then he got crap for how quick he was reopening. So I think he's really somebody that I don't know particularly if Governor Abbott in Texas was more aggressive in closing in his state faster than maybe other states, but I would say like even Texas is coming back online, and you see the effect that just that little marginal, hey, we're going to open some businesses, is having on people's morale in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so funny you say that. People are getting, they're getting slack for opening back up, like in Florida and everything. But they're not the only people getting slack for certain things and opening new avenues, if you will. President Trump's no stranger to that, especially with his whole Space Force program that he has now initiated. He's getting a lot of slack. He's getting a lot on that one. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. For those of you who are not familiar or don't know what's going on per se, but so President Trump has enacted another branch of the military called Space Force. So Space Force was first talked about and introduced back in 2018. And on December 20th, 2019, it was officially enacted by law that Space Force be a new branch of the military. So Space Force, like I said, is a new separate and independent branch of the military, very similar to that of the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, just the same. It's its own branch. And the basic gist of Space Force is for a military presence that has to deal with the protection of satellites and other technology dealing with space. And obviously, it's going to be the military force if and when it becomes feasible that we are actually out in space. So, like I said, President Trump's getting some, pushback on this. A lot of people are taking it as a joke. As a matter of fact, there is a Netflix movie coming out that is basically a spoof comedy on it. It's going to be starring Steve Carell. And it's just very interesting. These are the things that everyone likes to harp on about President Trump. But it's no different than, for those of you who don't realize, but President Reagan had something similar back in the 80s with his Star Wars, and he blatantly took it from the title of in my opinion, one of the greatest movies, Star Wars. He had a Star Wars project where he was going to put lasers and nuclear weapons in outer space to basically have a monopoly on space warfare. And I mean, granted, it was more of a push and a tactic to have the Soviet Union go into an arms race with them to have them spend money so that way it could, force their economy to deplete. But it is something that is of importance. It definitely is of importance. It's not so crazy to think that space is an avenue for some type of warfare, some type of thing. I mean, we have satellites. Here's an example, okay? There are communication satellites up in orbit. There are military satellites up in orbit. There are other types of satellites in orbit that, if destroyed, could bring our government to a crippling halt, because then communications would break down, technology would break down, things would not, our Wi-Fi, as we potentially know it, might not be available to us. There are plenty of things that are going on up in space that people don't realize that help your everyday life. And these are the things that are trying to be protected here. Now, also, to put it this way, it is possible for satellites to be placed up in space that do hold nuclear weapons that at any point in time can be launched on any designated area that they feel targeted. It is not far from that happening. It can happen now. These are the things that we need to take care of. These are the things that we need to protect from. And another thing that people don't realize is that the Air Force, in conjunction with NASA, has been monitoring these things. So it's basically almost like what President Trump is doing is taking a branch of the Air Force out of the Air Force and making it its own branch. So that way, all it worries about is exactly that, is space. Our first testing people again, this is a lot of what people don't realize, but our first testing into going into outer space was conducted by the Air Force. It wasn't necessarily conducted by NASA, it was conducted by the Air Force. The very first attempts of trying to have jets or any types of crafts that can break the atmosphere were regular fighter jets that had some type of modifications to them that made it stronger and was able to gain altitude better than regular fighter jets. And these were coming from the Air Force. So this has been going on for a long time. It's just not been its own branch of the military, and now it is. But Peter, I know you have more to discuss on that.
No,
And
so
about the
you hit
positive
on
effects and the need for
yeah, you hit on two great points there. One of them being so it was actually 2018 is when the idea really started gaining traction, but this was essentially another promise from President Trump that the hashtag comes into my mind. Promises made, promises kept, and this is really the essence of the Trump administration here. Is they deliver when they have these I don't want to call them crazy ideas, but a little outlandish in a way.
right.
This out of the box idea, and now we have this new branch of our military. As a matter of fact, last week they launched their first satellite as the official. They unveiled their flag last week, and then shortly after they launched their first satellite into space. It was about the size of a microwave, I believe. It was designed by some of the cadets, the first class of cadets at the Space Force, and so they're already off to a great start. I know that part of their mission is going to be in keeping with another promise that was made by President Trump, which was that we'll have a manned flight to the moon. Hopefully, the goal is to have our first female flight to the moon by 2024. I believe it might have been in 2024, but that's a very ambitious goal considering we're just 3 years away. And it makes me think often about the goal that President Kennedy had set for the space program, and I don't think we really ever considered it to be about national security. I think at that time it was more about securing American dominance in science and technology. It didn't really have a strategic military tie-in. The difference is that now our efforts actually do, and it'll ultimately be up to the historians to decide 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, whether or not President Trump's efforts were uh, really important towards expanding our military strength. I'm sure some will argue that in a way he may be an isolationist just because we deal less with the outside world than we previously did under other presidents. But at the same time, I would argue that we're making a giant leap here towards expanding our military, and we haven't seen that happen in a very long time. Um, Regardless of whether we're in peacetime or wartime, and I think we're not in a serious wartime now where we're fighting an enemy the size of Russia. Um, we have this opportunity now to grow our military and further science a little bit while we're at it, but really grow our military. And I believe strongly that space is the next frontier for
Mhm.
warfare, for economic prosperity, and just for the existence of humans. We have to venture outward. Um, Whether you're a Trekkie fan or a Star Wars fan, I think we all have some feeling that there is life out there besides us. And interesting, a couple of wires, Joe, I believe you were in that. We were just talking about whether or not there is life out there in another galaxy on another planet, and I think
Yes.
that's a question that we're really going to start getting an answer to within the next maybe not the next um, several decades, but at least within maybe our generation. We'll get it within our generation. And I really do believe that if it wasn't for President Trump, we wouldn't be closer to that the way we are now. So, Space Force is interesting. And you mentioned the SDI too, the Strategic Defense Initiative that President Reagan had launched. I mean, I think then
Yeah.
President Reagan there's a lot of stuff that he gets credited for, but this is one thing that's not commonly known. And so there's many comparisons that could be made, and people are going to shit on me for this, but there's many comparisons that could be made between Trump and Reagan, and I think this is one of them. Particularly the fact that it's a very ambitious goal, and you may not believe it when you hear it. I think people are going to be quick to criticize anything that comes out of either of their mouths, but at the end of the day, it really pushes American innovation to its fullest, and that's the part here that matters. It's all about improving the image of America, making America great again, keeping America great in the long run. And this is part of that motto right there.
Pete, you still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I figured you would want to pick up, and then we had awkward silence.
Can you
Oh,
hear me?
you're breaking up a little bit. Yep, now I hear you.
The video's cutting out. You're coming in a little choppy. That's right. I just didn't know if I'm still here.
No, keep going. If you want, I can keep talking about Space Force.
All right. Now the screen's not frozen anymore. What was that? What was that last thing you said? I'm sorry. It was cutting out.
No, you're fine. So the last thing I said was about I was comparing a lot of what President Trump does to the same type of thinking that President Reagan had, which was kind of enhancing American prosperity, enhancing the image of America. And I guess in a way, it's a very nationalistic approach, but at the end of the day, it plays into the motto of make America great again and keep America great. Space really is the next frontier, whether we realize it or not, and whether or not we get to the moon in 2024, or we discover other life out there in the world within our generation. I think President Trump's efforts now really enhance American prosperity. That's like the essence of his campaign slogan, and that's the out of the box thinking that I think his administration really utilizes more often than past candidates. It's not a cookie cutter bureaucratic. Let's just set a goal. And I think back to President Obama's goal that he set for Joe Biden of finding a cure for cancer, which whether or not and Vice President Biden had lost his son to brain cancer, I believe. It was cancer. I don't remember if it was brain cancer. Joe, I think you remember. The vice president obviously had his heart in it at the time, but the administration never really did anything more with that. It was kind of just an empty promise. But for President Trump, it's promises made, promises kept with the Space Force.
No, absolutely. Speaking of good old Joe Biden, why don't we talk about his VP nominations now? But for those of you, there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of stuff to go on about Space Force. Look into it. It's actually a very viable option here, and it's a very good thing. But go look into some things. It's very interesting, and I definitely think that it's a good job on President Trump's part. And also, like Peter said, it's promises made, promises kept. And this was something that he said he was going to do, and he did. But having said that, looking over towards the potential future vice presidents, or at least the potential future vice president running mates, if you will, for Joe Biden. So Joe Biden has officially announced earlier in March that he is going to pick a female for a VP. Now, this is fantastic. This is good.
I don't know why you would pigeonhole yourself to such a promise. It just kind of sets the bar for some sort of controversy. Like it's just you're automatically giving a window for the people to find a problem.
Well, it's funny you say that because that's in fact what is going on right now. So, and the problem is coming from the Democrats. It's not even coming from Republicans. So Joe Biden's not getting heat from any of the Republicans that he decided that I'm only going to pick a female and not a man, but he's getting heat from the Democrats because the Democrats are claiming that he's not being diverse enough by only saying that he's going to pick a woman. He needs to either pick a Hispanic or a Black woman. Otherwise, he's not being diverse enough. Now, Joe Biden does happen to have a slew of VP hopefuls that he has, and there are Black and Latinos that he is going to pick from, basically. But, to name a few, some of his potential candidate picks are Senator Kamala Harris, former United States National Security Advisor Suzanne Rice, House Rep Val Demings, Barbara Lee from California. There's also Stacey Abrams, former gubernatorial candidate out of Georgia, that is potentially in the running. There is New Mexico's Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. There is Michigan Governor. Why am I drawing a light on her name?
Gretchen Whitmer.
Thank you, Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah, so the Michigan governor from.
Sorry, I don't think most people know who she is anyway, so it's fine.
It is fine, right? Yeah. Also, there was also Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois.
Yep.
But she's Asian, so she'd also be an Asian. She'd be the first Asian VP. So those are the selections. Again, some of them are Hispanic, some of them are Black, some of them are white. I didn't necessarily go in any specific order as to race, but those are some of the top picks or some of the hopefuls that they're talking about. But the first and foremost one that I want to talk about is Stacey Abrams. Now, Stacey Abrams, I'm kind of torn here a little bit because part of me is very happy with what she's doing, but not happy with what she's doing at the same time. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's a bit of a tradition here in this country that when a person is thought as being a potential vice president candidate, that they humbly thank for the recognition, but at the same time show reluctance to wanting to be the VP nod. And basically the whole thing is like, oh, I'm so honored that I'm being considered potentially, but I'm focusing on my current job right now. I am focusing on being the senator of my great state, or the House representative of my great state, or the governor of my great state. And that's where my focus is. Stacey Abrams is doing the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, Stacey Abrams is the one that's pushing and promoting herself to be VP, not necessarily that she's actually being asked to be VP or even considered to be VP. She's basically throwing her name out there saying, hey, I'm your VP. There's nobody else. I'm going to be your VP. So I like that she's doing that because, to be quite honest with you, if you want something, go out and get it. So I commend her 1,000% for doing that. And she's even said it, that if no one's going to speak up for her, then if she's not going to speak up for herself, nobody's going to speak up for her. So I commend this woman for doing that. Absolutely. However, though, I do not think she's the right choice. She's trying to take a gubernatorial loss and turn it into a VP nod. Now, here's the thing. She's not gone much further than state legislature of her own state in Georgia. She did lose a close race in Georgia, but it was very clear. Not only that, she, of course, started crying out that it was a rigged and fixed election and that she was cheated out of the election to the Republican candidate for Georgia. Now, there's a slew of things to go into with that. One of them being that the current governor of Georgia was the Secretary of State during the election, and he, through his powers as Secretary of State, were closing off some voting sites to help him get votes. He was also taking people off the ballots so that way it could help. But none of that stuff was actually from him. The stuff that she's referring to, which rigged her gubernatorial election, was all done by the localities of Georgia. So the individual city municipalities or further city counties that did anything with the voting that she's claiming is why she lost and why it was a rigged election. So basically, if history tells us anything, it's that most things get repeated. It's probably going to be, if she doesn't win, it's because it was rigged and it was fixed. And this is something that we see largely on the left side ever since the 2016 election, that everything is rigged, everything is fixed, that it's not possible that Democrat could lose unless it's rigged. She'll just bring more of that to the table. Plus, I don't think she's the right candidate. I admire her zeal, but I don't think she's that great of a candidate. And, you know, one of the other things that this whole distinction of it needs to be Hispanic or a Black woman to be the VP is because they're saying that Joe Biden's not going to be able to garner the minority vote as, let's say, Barack Obama did. That's why he needs the minority aspect in the VP nod. But the thing is, to go to Stacey Abrams probably wouldn't be able to help garner that either. She did a good job with the young crowd and the young minority crowd in Georgia, but she didn't do well with the minority crowd overall in Georgia. So I don't think she would necessarily be the proper play there
It's
if that's
also
what you're looking
Georgia.
at. And just as a side note here, right, exactly. It's also Georgia. That's correct. But this is why I hate identity politics, and this is what this falls down on, is identity politics. And the reason why I hate identity politics is because you focus too hard on one group, and then the other group comes out going, well, that's not right. That's not right. I mean, that's what they're doing here. They're falling on identity politics, and it's all just looking the vote. That's it. They're not looking for a candidate who actually has the qualifications or has the ability to actually be the VP. They're just looking for someone who's going to get a certain group to vote. But what do you do here in this situation? Because if he chooses a Latino Hispanic woman, then he's alienating the black vote. If he chooses a Black female candidate, he's alienating the Hispanic Latino vote. And so it's this ongoing thing. This is why identity politics is not good. And we're seeing this happen now with Joe Biden's pick. I mean, in my personal opinion, of the playing field of who potentially could be his VP nod, I think all in all, I think he should go with Elizabeth Warren. I think Senator Warren is his best bet. I really do. I think she will get the votes that he needs. I think she has the experience that he's saying he wants. I think she has the know-how in areas that he doesn't. And I mean, I'm going off of based purely on what credentials and purely what Joe Biden's looking for in a candidate. Joe Biden has said that he's looking for a candidate who knows things that he doesn't know, that has the ability to bring something to the table that he can't, and that can get a certain kind of vote. And I think that is Elizabeth Warren. I really do. I think of all the candidates, it's Elizabeth Warren. Maybe potentially the other one is the governor of Michigan. The governor of Michigan is a good one, but I would also think that maybe the governor from New Mexico, Lewin, who does happen to be a Hispanic woman, I think she might be a good nod too. I think those are the three people that he should really be looking at seriously. I think it should be the governor from Michigan, who is Michelle Lewin Grissom, and he should be looking at Elizabeth Warren, and he should be looking at the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmire. I think those are the three best choices. I really do. I think they can fill in everything he's looking for in a VP. And listen, here's the thing. I'm not one of those people that's going to be like, well, if a Democrat's president, I don't want them to succeed. I want them to succeed because this is my country. I love this country. I want us to succeed. And if the president's a Democrat, I want them to succeed. So I would want these people in because I think they're the best for the job if they're elected. Do I think they're better than the Republican side? No. But if they're elected and a Democrat's in place, that's who I think should be in place on the Democrat side. Those are the candidates I think are the proper choice.
The sad part, though, is I don't think you're going to get that. I think you're going to get a purely political relationship. And I was talking about this with somebody the other day. It was trying to figure out the Joe Biden situation. Who's really driving Joe Biden? And that's a very loaded question here. I don't necessarily think, I think Joe Biden's heart is in this, and I give him credit for having his heart in the race. I'll give him that. But at the end of the day, I think the people that surround him, they are more worried about, I always say, manipulating the old man who
Mhm.
doesn't know any better. And I think that the people that a lot of these people that are speaking up about wanting to be vice president, they don't care about the fact that um, they don't care about the office of the vice presidency. They see, hey, this is an old man that possibly has dementia, who isn't is not all there. Something could happen to him, but I pray him that he has a healthy life ahead of him, but something could happen to him after he's elected, and this person could
I
very
mean,
well
he's
take over.
78
And
years old, right?
what was that?
He's seven. If I'm not mistaken, Joe Biden is 78 years old.
Yeah, he is old. He is
Right.
old. I mean, we're faced with one of the oldest slate of candidates in our
That's correct.
nation's history,
That's correct.
and this includes Trump.
Yeah, Trump's in
But
his
Trump,
70s as well.
yeah, he is. He is. He's in his 70s as well. Bernie Sanders would have been in that bracket. Bernie Sanders actually might be 80 already, or well, close to 80, but they're getting up there. And
Right.
I think, yeah. So Stacey Abrams, she's aggressively pushing herself out there. I don't necessarily think her interests are in the best interest for the nation. I think that for her, it's all about power, and a lot of the things she said, I think one of the most recent quotes she made that created some controversy was how the I have to find it, but it was basically the vice president should be somebody of color. They said, like, that's all people are going to care about, and I don't think a lot of people vote that way. And I don't think they care about supporting a ticket if it has a male or a woman on it. I don't think they care about supporting a ticket if the person is black, Latino, or white. At the end of the day, most people are single issue voters, and this really boils down to what's that one issue that drives them the most. For some of them, it is civil liberties. It is advancing rights for minorities, um, eradicating income inequities in minority communities. And there's a whole bunch of other things, and it's a totally separate topic. But I think for the most part, the the driving force of this election is really going to be the issues. It's not going to be a matter of race. It's going to be, it may be whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, and people are going to go vote for the Democrat just because at the end of the day it's not Donald Trump. But nobody's going to vote, in my opinion, based on the color of somebody's skin, um, or their ethnicity. I don't see it, and that's why Stacey Abrams. I
Well,
don't see her. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say just to that point, there are some we can't take away from the fact that there are some people who do vote that way. There
Look, if that's the
definitely are people
case,
that vote.
if that's the case, then I feel, and I think this whole thing is put to the test in the Democratic presidential primary, and we saw a very similar thing on the Republican side in 2016. Um, uh, I'm thinking of Marco Rubio in 2016, a Latino candidate that this party could have gotten behind and didn't. Um, I don't think it was because of the fact that he was Latino. I think at the end of the day, it was just he wasn't as aggressive a candidate or as bombastic a candidate as Donald Trump.
No.
And there's others that have come up through the years, and Hillary Clinton being a female, you would assume she would have won. Yes, she got the popular vote, but clearly a majority of Americans didn't. I'm sorry, a majority of Americans in the states that have more electoral votes didn't necessarily think that way. And even with the Democratic primary for president, there was I'm thinking he has the brother that was Trump's. He's a congressman. I can't think of his name, and I'm going to butcher it. Let's see. Hold
You-
on, bear with us. I'm looking it up. We're revolutionary here at the SIYR live show. We have tablets and everything. Julian Castro. That's the name I
Okay.
was thinking of.
Yes.
But Cory Booker and Kamala Harris as well, minorities who didn't really outperform any of the white candidates that were running. So I really don't think race comes into it, and that's why Stacey Abrams, if that's her only,
Yeah,
if that's her driving force, because I'm a black woman, I'm sorry, that's not enough, and it's not going to be enough for the voters.
well,
You know,
that shouldn't be it at all. In any capacity for anything, it shouldn't be. Again, that just falls back into what I was saying before about identity politics. That should not be your credentials. Your credentials should not be I'm a person of color, therefore I deserve this position.
yeah.
That's not.
I mean, separate from that though, I mean, so you mentioned Whitmer from Michigan. I mean, she's another one who's blatantly begging for the job, and first of all, I think that's pathetic. Anybody that's begging to be vice president, begging for office the way they are, it really is pathetic. A side note about Governor Whitmer, she was having businesses in her state have been closed. She's somebody who we've referenced in our conversations about abuse of executive authority.
Right.
She had most of the businesses in her state closed, yet she managed to have um, T-shirts printed for her vice presidency run. I'm guessing she's going to use them to persuade delegates at the convention to push for her.
Yeah.
But bottom line here, she's another one who begging for the job, and it looks really so bad, and I just don't think that's the quality that you want in a vice presidential candidate. I can't think of anybody in the past several election cycles that is begged the way so blatantly the way these two women have.
They haven't. And you know what? It's Peter. I think it's part of the fact of what you touched upon before, when you were basically alluding to the fact that Joe Biden could be in a sticky situation if and when he became president because of his ailments and his age and everything like that. I think I think that the whole thing is that these people are coming out to really push for themselves because they see a real opportunity here that it's like I can circumvent an election by becoming VP and actually becoming president without having to go through an election process. Now, I mean, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, obviously, but I mean,
If
we
you've ever
have here a
watched,
candidate who,
if you've
like
ever
you
watched
said,
Veep on HBO, that's literally.
mhm,
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I mentioned, so I was saying if you ever watch the show Veep on HBO, then you see um like both Stacey Abrams and um Gretchen Whitmer, they remind me of Selena Myers and how she basically got lucky in getting into office, the office of the presidency. And after one term, it was as if the nation was done with her. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, the nation was done with her. But she lost her election to a first legal term. But the funny part is with Elizabeth Warren, and I just another thing that we usually mention in our conversations that I have about who he's going to end up picking is I think Liz Warren is too much of a powerhouse to on that side of the aisle, too much of a big name, um, too much of a big name to really uh, have it up next to Biden. I don't necessarily think that's going to help his ticket, and I often feel like the person that's the vice president should be low key enough where they're in the background and they're not creating too much controversy or too much news. And we see that with Mike Pence. Mike Pence is a perfect behind the scenes guy, and I go back to what I said last week about him being an effective manager. And I really think that we're gonna see hopefully by Friday. I think he said Memorial Day weekend was the goal. The Biden campaign. They said Memorial Day weekend was when we were going to know. I think we're going to see definitely not Kirsten Gillibrand. And I put this in our little preview for today because it's she's kind of flying low here on this whole thing, but she is somebody who ran on a platform that empowered women and all about women's rights, all about the Me Too movement, and she sold out quicker than toilet paper um, with regard to endorsing Joe Biden and just sticking herself in his camp. I don't know if she's hoping to benefit in some way. She's certainly not gunning for vice president. She would be a massive Brookstone tied to that ticket because she she's supporting a she's supporting a guy she's supporting a guy who has people that have accused him of sexual harassment, and his response is, well, if they don't believe me, and if they believe her, then they should go and vote for somebody else. And it's crazy how Democrats were essentially the biggest supporters of the Me Too movement. Some of the leading Democrats in the country, and you saw this a lot with Hillary's campaign, biggest supporters of the Me Too movement, and now all of a sudden it's as if they're playing the same tactic book as Donald Trump just to see if it works. But I find it funny how Kirsten Gillibrand, Kirsten Gillibrand specifically, um, is selling out in that way. I don't know what her political future is. I know she pissed off a lot of New Yorkers when she was running for re-election to the Senate. She lied on TV and told everybody, "I'm not running for president," and then 5 months later, after the 2018 election, about 4 or 5 months later, she announces she's running for president. Actually, it might have been less. It might have been 2 months later. So she really sold out New York. She sold
Yeah,
out
a lot
women.
of people in New
Um,
York are upset about that.
I don't necessarily think it's going to be a woman. That's why I'm saying, like, I think his campaign was foolish for tying themselves to that tree. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just at the end of the day, it may not necessarily give them a winning ticket. And what they need now more than ever is a winning ticket,
Right.
especially in the states that have a lot of influence that Donald Trump picked up over Hillary Clinton in the 16 election. Um, I think that alone is the evidence that a woman ticket doesn't a ticket featuring a woman doesn't necessarily mean a win. So we'll see what happens. Nobody really comes to mind. If you would ask me 2 months ago, I probably would have agreed with you on the Elizabeth Warren thing. But now I see the way things are going, and I really think it's going to be somebody that sneaks in and gets lucky. Um, you might be right about Stacey Abrams. I think she's really put herself out there in a way that maybe locked Biden's campaign into having to pick her, just because she's essentially gotten a month of headlines out of, hey, I'm potentially going to be the VP pick. Smart, really smart. You're right. I
Yeah,
give her a
no,
lot of credit for that.
absolutely.
But
I give her full marks for that. It's fantastic. It really is, like what she's doing really it's great. I mean, listen, my entire life, that's what I've always been under the impression. That's what I've always operated under. If you want something, go get it. You're not entitled to anything. Nothing should be handed to you. You want to go get it. And that's basically what she's doing. She is going to she wants that VP nod. She's putting it out there. She's telling the universe, like, I'm the VP. That's it. And I mean, so I commend her for that. But whether or not she's actually the right person for it is a totally different story. Again, it's just this whole thing,
yeah,
even the fact that, like you said, like Joe Biden should not have put himself in the position where he said that I'm only going to choose a woman.
yeah. One
It
of our
just it
wires
clutches
actually
him
just
so it
commented.
handcuffs him, not clutches him. Sorry, it handcuffs him.
One of our wires just commented about Mike Bloomberg during the mayor's race in 2009, saying he never considered a person, particularly of race, when appointing people to a position. And I think that this particular wire, Mike Hayes, shout out Mike Hayes, said that
Mike,
Biden should have
hey,
said
how you
something
doing?
similar during this debate. I just think anybody, it's like, why, even if you run a company, why turn around and pigeonhole yourself to, I'm going to appoint somebody to a position based on race, religion, or whatever, unless maybe that's what the job is specifically about. Um, I just don't see there being a benefit to doing that. But I let's go to a parallel universe here, which, by the way, NASA, which we can thank President Trump for this as well, recently said that they discovered possibly discovered a parallel universe where everything's backwards. So in this parallel universe,
No,
let's say that it's let's
Hillary
say it's
Clinton
Bernie
is
Sanders.
president.
Hillary Clinton's president. No, let's say it's Joe Biden, and instead of picking a female, he picks a male. Who do you think really would make the short list? In my head, I'm thinking here something I hit on 2 weeks ago, um, when we were talking about the Dem primary here in New York. Andrew Cuomo as vice president, a pick for vice president. I think that would be pretty interesting, considering Andrew Cuomo has a storied history with the Democratic Party, and we know already that he's an effective manager. He's done a number of years at HUD, and he's worked in the Clinton administration in other ways. Um, the same as Bill de Blasio, except Bill de Blasio is a terrible manager, and we know this for a variety of reasons. But Andrew Cuomo arguably is a decent manager to some degree. Put aside the nursing home issue, I think he would have probably have been on the running list, the short list rather, for a Biden VP pick. Um, I can't think of another duo, and I don't think there was anybody in the field of candidates there. Bernie Sanders being too outrageous to really do a Biden Sanders ticket. But if it really
I think it
was,
would be Newsom.
who do you think?
I think Newsom would be maybe on the short list.
Yeah, I feel like it has to be somebody that's slightly irrelevant, but not. Andrew Cuomo was irrelevant before he rose to the type of fame he did. Irrelevant in the sense that they're not Bernie Sanders or
Right.
Elizabeth Warren.
Well,
They're
I don't think that Cuomo would be a good VP for Sanders because I think he would overpower Sanders.
Yeah.
I think he'd be way too
Well,
overpowering.
for Biden though, for Biden.
Oh, for Biden. Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about for Sanders. Even still, for Biden I think Cuomo would actually probably be a good running mate for Cuomo. Not for Cuomo. Sorry, for Biden. That might be good. But okay. So here's what I think of, right? And this touches back to what you were saying too earlier before, where you need like a good background person. I think the perfect kind of duo would be Cuomo and de Blasio. Like Cuomo being the presidential candidate, de Blasio being the VP. Because Cuomo can easily hold de Blasio at bay. Whether he's a good manager is a different story. He is absolutely not a good manager. Horrible. But the point is, he could so outshine and overshadow de Blasio that it keeps and puts him in the VP spot where he should be.
Well, I think that's effectively what you want in a president vice president relationship. You want something like that.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily think a winning ticket is Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, but I think the dynamic.
Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah, you hit on a good topic though about the relationship, the dynamic in that relationship, and I think that's traditionally what most people think the office of the vice president it really serves is it's ceremonial in nature. They're really behind the scenes, and I think Trump has kind of redefined the office of the vice president, the same as George W. Bush did, in the sense of you give more behind the scenes managerial responsibilities to the VP. I think they've done a good job doing that. I necessarily don't. I can't think of anything good that Joe Biden did as vice president to Barack Obama, other than the fact that he was vice president to Barack Obama. And I think really, you look at you have to really look at it like what's a win ticket. And I think that this goes back to the Biden saying he wants a woman of color as VP. You're pigeonholing yourself to something that may not necessarily be the formula for a winning ticket. And regardless of whether Biden would have, in this parallel universe, whether or not Biden would have been the nominee, if it was Andrew Cuomo who somehow decided to come out and be the candidate, which everybody thought he was going to be at some point. I don't see them employing that tactic. If it was anybody but Biden, they would not have employed that tactic of we're going to put a female in there. And maybe, and tinfoil hat time here, maybe this is the way that they figure they can get a woman elected into office. You put up a dementia old man as the presidential pick, and in their heads they hope something happens and that this individual will not be able to perform their job, and the vice president pick, the female, would then step in and now, this is the first female in office, and you literally have a TV show unfolding before your eyes.
Really think that's what it is.
Yeah. Somebody said it recently. Conspiracy theories are rooted in truth, and they often are. And I don't like to be so cynical, but I really do envision this being a possibility.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I definitely think that there is some alternate understanding here that this is the way, like I said, to circumvent an actual nationwide presidential election with a female as the candidate. I think this is their way to do that, and because who if he wins, who knows if he can make it through 4 years? Who really knows if he can make it through 4 years? And this might, like I said, this might be, both of us have said this. This might be their way to be like, all right, well, this is how we get a woman into the White House, you know. But yeah, on that note, I would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I think this was a great episode. We had some good comments in the field, and it was nice to talk about. There's a lot going on right now, so we're gonna have more to come to, and we look forward to seeing you guys. Remember, every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. I know we got into a late start today, but we had some technical difficulties. You guys could see that. But 8 o'clock next Wednesday. We'll see you then.
Adios.